Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripasindhuvayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dhanyavad Pranam devotees. So this is not so much in relation to a question I received. I will also catch up on the questions and answers. I do have some questions which are still in the vault, so to speak, and I will get those answered. But I want to speak to something that has been Dhanyavad Sadhana Siddha Prabhu. I want to speak to something that was part of our phone conference classes over the last couple of days. I guess as many of you know by now, for more than 19 years, especially due to the service of many devotees, but especially headed by Shriman Bhumipati Prabhu in New York, he's maintained a phone conference which has grown exponentially from its origin almost 19-20 years ago. And that happens Monday through Fridays at 7 p.m. I'll try to put the details of that in the comments here for some persons who are interested. You do need to check your phone carrier because there are some carriers that do create a charge, but for the most part, I know most major carriers, they don't give you a charge for participating in the phone conference. So anyways, I'll put those details in the comments here. Maybe not right away because I'm kind of multitasking here. But what we want to talk about was something we did discuss over the last couple of days, which is an interesting topic that I have spoken about to some degree in the past. And that's related to the concept of suffering and the jiva, or the atma, or the soul. So normally, part of the entire Krishna conscious presentation that's made to persons when they are first approaching the path of bhakti is that one of its hallmark qualities is that it frees one from the cycle of samsara, or birth and death, and frees one from their suffering, right? Even Srila Rupa Goswami Pad is written, Kleshagni Shubhada. The beginning process of bhakti is kleshagni. It gets rid of all kinds of klesh or suffering. So the idea that we want to discuss here, though, is what is actually suffering and how is it related to the soul? So I think on many occasions we've discussed that really the genesis of the soul in the material sojourn, through the cycle of samsara, doesn't really have a genesis or original causality. Now, our acharyas have given various narratives, and even in Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a narrative given by Narada Muni to Maharaj Prachinabhari, describing a sort of original relationship with the Lord that is broken because of one, a independence that is in the jiva. Secondly, a misuse of that independence, and some violation of the mood of service towards the Lord. And we look at that as the sort of original causality of the jiva sojourn in the material world. But when you examine it closely, and you look in Srimad Bhagavatam, I've quoted this verse many, many times on these live sessions, Canto 11, chapter 22, verse number 10. Anadi avidya yuktasya purushasya veda atmanam. That the jiva's connection with avidya, which is the essential feature that allows the atma, which is itself a spiritual energy, to come in contact with the material energy, that avidya shakti is from anadi, means from a time without a beginning, yukta to the bada jiva. So now I think here we have to give a quick explanation. The Jiva souls in the category of what is called Tatashta. The word Tatashta is not a locale. It is not a place. It is a tendency in the Jiva. So it is called Tatashta Shwabhav, a nature in the Jiva that allows them to be influenced by either the external energy of the Lord or the spiritual internal energy of the Lord. That possibility of being under either influence is called Tatashta Shwabhav. To explain it, for instance, in the 15th chapter of Jaiva Dharma, our Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has given many examples, including some from the Brihad Aranyakya Upanishad, which describes examples such as a large fish swimming from one bank of a river to another. And observing both sides makes a choice to come one way or another. But if you look carefully in the concluding part of that same 15th chapter, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur directly expresses, the jivas are eternal entities which exist only in two categories, nitya, accomplished or nitya siddha, and anadi or nitya bhada. Here the word nitya applied to the conditioned jiva means anadi bhada, from a time without any beginning. Because their conditional life is not something that the word nitya literally means without a beginning and without an end. But you can't say that the bhada jiva will be in material life without any end. That's not proven anywhere. In fact, to the opposite. Dasabhuti hari eva, nanyasha eva kadapchana. It says the jiva by nature is the das of Krishna, and therefore they cannot have a permanent status within the cycle of samsara. Of course, the cycle of samsara will be broken when they come in contact with the spiritual energy, especially via sadhu, guru, etc. So, point being here that there are only two categories, Nitya Mukta and Anadi Bhada. So there's not a third category like a staging area or a locale where the jiva is situated prior to coming to the material world. So now that that is established, a unique question arises about the suffering of the Bhada jiva. And that brings in all kinds of theological implications around what's something that's even studied in universities now is called theodicy, which is trying to explain the bad things that may happen if there is a God. Right? So that's just paraphrasing of what theodicy is about. Now, why do bad things happen to good people? And that's not really it, but it's if there is a God, how could evil exist? So, one thing to understand here is the implications that would come or arise in the Bhada jiva that questions the partiality or rather the impartiality of God in regards to some jivas being eternally situated already in the spiritual world and others being placed or so-called placed in the material world, and hence having to suffer, which is the genesis of our whole discussion here. Give me 1 minute. As I mentioned, I'm multitasking. I need to attend to something. Please give me a second. All right, please forgive me for that. That very seldom happens. Okay, so the Bhada jiva then naturally has inquiry about why I would be put into a position seemingly that was a case of partiality and I would have to suffer. So that's what we kind of want to deal with in this presentation here. One is, I've already mentioned that the jiva sojourn within the material world is anadi. Literally, the word anadi means something that has no beginning. But it is explained that the word anadi also means something that does have an end. So though it does not have a beginning or genesis, it does have an end. So all questions regarding original causality, the genesis of reasons why the jiva is in the material world, they're arising from the self-interest of the jiva while they're under illusion. While they're in the conditioned state, these questions are arising. Well, Mukunda, can you please give some elaboration here? Because wouldn't it be natural that people inquire about why they're in a position of suffering? So, if we look that actually, from the point of Bhagavan, is there any such thing as the material world? Is there any such thing as suffering? I'm looking from the perspective of Bhagavan. And the reason I'm going to bring that up is because it's clearly mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Swanksha Vibhinaksha Rupa Hanabhishtar. Here it's saying that in all of his different personal forms, means various incarnations, including Swayam Rup, or the original form of God, Krishna, Swamsa Vibhinaksha Rupa Hanabhishtar. The Lord has interactions with all of the Vibhinaksha Jivas. So Vibhinaksha Jivas of two categories, those who are Nitya Siddha and those who are Anaribada. Ananta Vaikunte, Brahmananda, Karena Vihar. And he performs these leelas, vihar, these pastimes, both in the unlimited Vaikunta, which is inclusive of Golok Vrindavan, Ayodhya Dham, Dwarka Mathura, all of the Vaikunta planets, etc., and also in the Brahmanandas, means within the material arena. So here, if the case is that the Lord is performing a leela within both Vaikunta and in the Brahmanandas, in the material world, then actually this whole material domain is actually a leela stan of Bhagavan. From his perspective, there is not a place of difference between this leela and that leela. In other words, his leela in Vaikuntha and his leela here in the material arena, so-called, because from Bhagavan's perspective, it's not material. Just like when the Lord descends along with his Dham. Do we say Vrindavan Dham is material? No. We say it's transcendental. It's certainly in Uttar Pradesh, right? You can take a flight there, but the question is it material or not? So, at least intellectually, we appreciate that no, Vrindavan Dham, Navadvip Dham, Jagannath Puri Dham, all of the holy Dhams, they're transcendental. So we acknowledge that from a certain angle of vision, things even in the material arena are actually transcendental. So from the perspective of Bhagavan, the entire creation in which he performs his Srishti Lila, means creation Lila, and descent within that Srishti Lila is all transcendental. So from the point of view of Bhagavan, there cannot be an assessment of an idea of partiality that some jivas are manifest here and some jivas are manifest in the spiritual arena, quote. Because from Bhagavan's perspective, it is all spiritual. Now, the second thing deals with, well, Mukunda, yeah, you can say like that, but we have acknowledged, even by our acharyas, that the jivas in this world are suffering. Dukkalyam ashashvatam. In the temporary world, all the way from the highest planet of Brahma down, are places of suffering. So, how do you account for that? Certainly you have to account for, if you don't say from Bhagavan's perspective that this is not a material place, still people are suffering here. So that's what I want to kind of analyze now. And I've done it before in previous discussions, but I think reiteration in this particular instance is important. So we need to deal with two things. One is, first, an analysis of actually what is suffering. In the Paramatma Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami Pad has enumerated 21 qualities of the soul. In those 21 qualities, he mentions specifically one quality, Chit Ananda Atmaka. So Chit means to be conscious. He's not jud, he's not inert. He's fully conscious. And Ananda Atmaka. In his Atma, there is no prospect or element of suffering. So Jiva Goswami then comments himself. Dukkha Pratyogita. The word Pratyogi comes from Nyaya Darshan, means one school of thought in India is called Nyaya. And from that school of thought, there's a concept called Anuyogi, Pratyogi, etc. So Pratyogi means the antithesis or the opposite of something. So he's saying the soul, by its very nature, is void of any kind of misery or suffering. So we have to acknowledge that whatever suffering exists is not in the Atma itself. So from the point of view of Bhagavan, that his Vibhinamsa expansions, the Atmas, the suffering is not in that. It's not in the Atma. But Mukunda and one Prabhuji is giving an example, but you have so many examples of various horrible atrocities and even natural disasters, because we acknowledge whatever suffering is there happens in three different divisions: Adhyatmic, Adhibhautik, Adhidaivik, right? Miseries by one's own body and mind, caused by others, and caused by natural disturbances. So what is that misery though? If the misery is not in the Atma, where is the connection with misery? So this is where clearly understanding what is avidya comes in. The nature of the avidya shakti that we have been from Anadikal, I quoted the verse earlier, we've been connected with from time without any beginning. This avidya shakti first presents the jiva with a false conception of not being the Atma. That conception is called asmita. The word asmi means I am. So, asmita presented under avidya, the absence of knowledge of who I really am, is called asmita. Let me say it again. Avidya means the lack of vidya, or knowledge of who I truly am. That same energy then presents to me an idea or a conception, or a conception of who I think I am. That is called asmita. To reinforce that asmita, that who I think I am, the material energy provides what is called ahamkara. Because asmita simply means I'm something. But under avidya means I'm something, but I'm not who I actually am, which is the das of Krishna. So now ahamkara comes, and the ahamkara, almost like a sheath, covers this asmita and produces a further conception of being something we're not by giving us a false ego, we commonly say, or a false conception. I am the karana and karata of my existence. I'm the doer and the cause of my existence. So right away, two misconceptions about self-identity are placed over the Atma. Jiva Goswami Pada has described this. Maya avrita surupa jnanata. Maya avrita means this covering of avidya, or Maya Shakti, does avrita, means it covers surupa jnanata, the knowledge of who I actually am. Due to that potency of covering my actual identity and presenting first asmita then ahamkara, I now have the conception of being whatever is the present karmic package that is unwound in the cycle of samsara. This is called an upadi. Like in the verse, Sava upadi vinir muktam, getting rid of all upadis leads to liberation. So an upadi is the particular designation in any given karmic dispensation that you get. Like in Srimad Bhagavatam it mentions, Kamana Daivana Natrena Jantu Dehopupatye. Right? That every new iteration of our existence, we're born to a particular family, in a particular place, under a particular circumstances, etc., etc. Then we get a particular designation, it's called the upadi. I've given this example before. Somebody becomes John Doe. Their parents are Jane Doe and Sam Doe, and they're born in this country, this place, under these circumstances. All of those three things, asmita, ahamkara, and your upadi, are now three coverings of your actual identity. In those false conceptions of the self, having relationship with the material energy, which has the features of dukkha, the vicarious identification of the Atma with those false identities, is where dukkha or misery lies. It's not in the Atma. Therefore, from the perspective of Bhagavan, and even from the perspective of the realized soul, they see the Atma is not suffering. The Atma under vicarious connection with the false identities is suffering. So what is the actual cause of suffering? The actual cause is that misconception, I am this material body with this particular presentation of ahamkara. That's where the misery is. The misery and suffering is in that vicarious connection. Because the Atma, of course, never directly touches material energy. I've quoted this verse many times also. Asanga hi anyam purusha. That the purush means the Atma, the soul, never sangha touches the material energy. So there's not even a literal contact. But because of this vicarious identification with a particular upadi, that means this body, I become thoroughly convinced, because one of the features of avidya is also called abhinivesh. Abhinivesh means the power to create an absorption that is so deep that one, the jiva cannot self-extricate. You can't get yourself out of it. In the third line of that verse I quoted originally from the 11th canto, 22:10, the third line says, Swato na sambhavanti. Anya, you yourself cannot extricate yourself from this absorption in Maya. It requires another person. That person is Jnanato Jnanadobhavet, who is a realized soul who's understood what is the nature of the Atma, what is the nature of Bhagavan, etc. And Jnanada means they have the Karuna Shakti, means mercy, or the attitude of wanting to give you that transcendental knowledge. So actual suffering exists in the vicarious connection, not in the Atma. And also not in the material energy. Because the material energy, it is in its nature to be both temporary and have the feature of duality, which means happiness and distress, suffering and not suffering. So another two features of avidya are rag and dvesh. The tendency to try to obtain happiness and avoid suffering. Because that's inbuilt, that's part of the nature of the material energy. So there's also not a fault in something being its nature. Just like an example is given, it is in the nature of some animals to bite, like snakes. Snakes bite. It's in their inherent nature. So we don't think if I was trying to help one snake and the snake bit me, oh, now it's the snake's fault, etc., etc. It's in the nature of the snake. It's in the nature of the material energy. You understand? That the three modes of material nature oscillate between goodness, passion, and ignorance and produce both suffering and happiness. That's in the nature of the material energy. So now in reality, when you look at it from that perspective, who is actually suffering? Because if the very first premise of bhakti is, I am not this body, am I suffering or not? Now, in a very pragmatic way, it is certainly proportional to our continued absorption in the material energy and the material body we have, that we experience what's in the material energy, which is happiness and distress, suffering and not suffering, etc. But it's not in the Atma. And certainly, the very first premise of bhakti is, you are the Atma. You're not the body. So I'm saying this to get a perspective on understanding why that when Bhagavan performs a lila, there may be jivas, that the Tatastha Jiva is situated throughout the expanse of Bhagavan's lila, including the Srishti lila. Because from the actual perspective, the jiva is not suffering. That is a part of the illusion of the jiva's vicarious identification with the material energy. So there is no original fault, there's no original causation or anything. It is in our nature to be the das of Bhagavan. And in being the das of Bhagavan, Bhagavan is also called Lilamai. Akila Rasa Amritamurti. He loves to taste rasa in so many different varieties of leelas. This is also one leela. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in 16th chapter of Jayavadama is clearly explaining that. So then he goes on to explain, when you take that angle of vision, that this is the Srishti leela, then from that angle of vision, we are participants. But if we have our own self-interest, then obviously our participation is not in Bhagavan's leela. It is in our own conceived leelas in one life after another. And therefore we are subject to the vicarious experience of suffering or happiness, etc., etc. But in reality, when we develop pure bhakti, which is called anya abilas ita sunya, not having any other desire except anukulena Krishna anusilanam. All seal means endeavors are simply for the anukul or happiness of Krishna. There are nuances to that I'm not explaining here, but therefore, when that frame of mind is there, we don't say that we are suffering. Just like Jiva Goswami is given a warning. When our acharyas are present and they are performing pastimes, including the leelas of becoming sick or ill, etc., if they are actually pure devotees, especially Nitya Parikars of Bhagavan, who've descended to this world, we have to understand their so-called suffering is actually part of a leela. It is called the Acharya Leela. Because if we say the Acharya is under the same condition illusion we are, that we're identifying with this body and therefore that's why they're suffering, how can we then look at them as being Guru Tattva or our Guru Vargas or Acharya? So they display in the Acharya Leela discomfort, sickness Leelas, etc., etc. But they are fully realized of their internal identity. They're not bewildered by believing that I'm actually John Doe. You understand? They understand their internal identity. And proportionate to any aspirant in bhakti understanding their internal identity, they have less consciousness of suffering in the material world. And that's why one verse is there, Tate anukampam sushamikshimano, bunja eva atmakritam vipakam. They're able to tolerate because they understand this is the effects of my prarabdha karma working itself out. Atmakritam. It was created by the previous activities that I've done, and now by the mercy of Bhagavan, that prarabdha karma is playing itself out. I'm not creating new karma if I'm engaged in bhajan sadhan in a proper way, and therefore one tolerates the outplay of the present or prarabdha karmas. Okay? So, this idea of suffering is very important because for most devotees, we came under the auspices that we're coming to bhakti to get free from suffering. And another important element of that conception is that as bhakti matures, we have to become more free from that initial impetus, which was to become free from suffering, and turn that into, I am aspiring for bhakti for the loving seva of Sri Sri Radha Krishna Mahaprabhu, not to get rid of my suffering. Why? Because the very nature of pure bhakti does not hold regard for our personal suffering or not. It's written in Chaitanya Charitamrita as well. Atma sukhi dukhi gopyo na karele vichar. The gopis were the prime example of not being or taking consideration, vichar, of their own atma sukh and dukh. They only considered what will make Krishna happy. Therefore Krishna told, na pareham nirvaja samyujam. Swaswadu kritam vibhura asyapiva. Even I have no way to repay you. Speaking in Lokik Sadbandhuvat means speaking in his lila like ordinary human. He says, I have no way to repay you. Even if I had the lifespan of Brahma. Yo ma bhajan durja geha shrinkala samvischa. Because you've given up everything to serve me. In Ujjwala Mani, it's explained there that of all kinds of suffering, for any young lady, the greatest suffering is any challenge or doubt of their chastity. When in Ujjwala Mani, it's giving a description of what is rag, it describes dukkam adikam chitte shukatvena eva rajayate. So here's describing that the nature of rag, the elevation of love, prem, comes to the stage of rag. What happens is that even when there's a circumstance in which dukkam adikam chitte, which there is dukh, then shukka tvena eva rajayate. Almost like when you dye a cloth and you put a cloth in dye, that dye permeates the cloth. In the same way, shuk permeates the heart of the eternal associates of the Lord, especially the gopis. Even upon the slight possibility, they may have Krishna's association. Like when Krishna goes for Gocharan, taking cows out and eating, sometimes gopis will go on Govardhan to look and see where Krishna is. That time in the blazing sun, the stones are so hot that it's causing so much pain. But on the pretense that I might see Krishna, on the possibility I might see Krishna, oh, their hearts become filled with sukh. And why do they want to see Krishna? They want to see Krishna. If you examine this verse, it's called Vasikrita verse, the last verse of Gopi Gita, because they want to give pleasure to Krishna, not for their own satisfaction. Why are gopis in such a deep mood of separation and sadness when Krishna goes to Mathura and Dwarka? Because gopis know the quality of our praying. It's called Samartha praying, Samartha praying, highest class of praying. And Radhika's is the highest of the highest. Madanakya Mahabhav. Knowing that Krishna only derives pleasure from that, he cannot derive pleasure from the queens in Dwarka. Their love is called Samanjasa, doubtful. So their suffering or pain is not for their own selves. It is because they're paying to think Krishna is not being happy. So in this way, Bhaktivinoda Thakur analyzes, give me one more second. All right, trying to do many things at once. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur also analyzes even the associates of Bhagavan in his different leelas apparently undergo suffering. Would it not be suffering that the residents of Ayodhya had to watch as Ram was banished to the forest for 14 years? Who can understand the suffering of Kunti and the Panch Pandavas? I just explained the nature of the suffering of Brijabasis, especially gopis, when Krishna goes to Mathura and Dwarka. But why does their suffering only produce bliss? A bliss that we have no pragmatic understanding of unless you've had the great fortune to have realized your Swarup and therefore you've participated in Lila and you can understand the nature of that kind of praying transformation that causes bliss even while suffering. If not, then all we have is our faith and our Sastra Praman and Sastra Yukti to understand these things. So it is explained that even in the depth of the greatest type of suffering, through separation, is the highest kind of bliss. We have no material metric that we can try to equate with that. And we'll simply end up using kalpana or imagination if we try. So we have to experience that by the growth of inner bhajan. But the praman is there, that there is no suffering in the spiritual dimension. So certainly all of their conditions are transformations of bliss. So what is the difference? None of us, I don't think, certainly all of us can attest to, based on our material vicarious connection, we can express various times we've suffered. But how many people can raise their hands and attest to the kind of suffering the Panch Pandavas went through? And hence, Mother Kunti being the mother, what kind of suffering she experienced? Who can experience what Mother Yashoda, Maharaj Nanda experienced? That very Krishna who was their life. If you look the backstory of Maharaj Nanda and Maya Yashoda, they had Krishna at a very going towards elderly age. They had not had a child. So Krishna was their everything. But now Akrura comes and takes to Mathura. So we don't, but there you don't find any protest, any, well, why did this happen to me? I am, after all, Mother Yashoda or Maharaj Nanda. Right? Why should this happen to us? You understand? You don't read anywhere like that. Of course, you may read there's expressions of their separation mood, but they don't make any complaint. You understand? And what is there was in the context of Lila. And it's in relation to Krishna, because here's the real theme. That all of their discussions are in relation to Krishna's happiness. Because Krishna doesn't really understand anyone as mother and father except Nanda and Yashoda. This is proven at Kurukshetra. When Vasudev and Devaki were present there, and Rohini Ma, along then came Yashoda and Nanda Baba, Krishna showed the depth of his love for Nanda and Yashoda. You can read this pastime, the meeting at Kurukshetra, you'll see. So here, my point is, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is emphasizing, even the eternal associates appear to undergo some kind of suffering. But because they only have Anukulena Krishna Anusilanam as the basis of their existence, they don't experience suffering, they experience bliss. Therefore, any suffering we're experiencing here is the result of self-interest for our own situation. It's not based around Krishna Anusilanam, it is based around my own Anusilanam. You understand? And that connection with the material energy in which we put ourselves in the position of the bhokta or the enjoyer naturally also comes concomitantly with dukkha, because the material energy has those two phases, sukh and dukh. The basis of it is duality in the material world. Right? Icha dvesha samuttitvena dvandva mohin bharata. So dvandva means there's duality here. The spiritual, on the other hand, is advaya gyan paratattva. It is of one substance. That substance is eternal existence, cognizance, and bliss. So I wanted to make this point so that, one, we can understand what is the actual nature of suffering and where it is located. Secondly, so that in doing sadhan bhajan and understanding that our sojourn in the material world is anadi, and that there is no original causation, no original fault, no original incident that took place that caused us to have to come here. From the perspective of Bhagavan, this is one lila. And again, when the question arises, well, in this lila, I apparently am suffering, we have to go back to what I just spoke here for more than 40 minutes maybe, which is that when you really analyze it, the Atma is not suffering, and you are the Atma. Therefore, if you have a bad dream and wake up and go down and start blaming everybody for your bad dream, you know, that obviously doesn't make sense. You understand? So in the same way, by investment of our consciousness in the material energy, then we have this vicarious experience of sukha and dukkha. Like if somebody chooses to go watch some horror movie or some other kinds of thing which is very disturbing. And when your consciousness becomes disturbed, whom will you blame for that? So in the same way, if the suffering is not in the Atma but only in material energy, then we are not actually suffering except by the depth of our vicarious relationship with the material energy. Therefore, our acharyas have used the narrative, come out of the material energy, get free from suffering by taking to Bhakti or Krishna consciousness. But again, that is the elementary stage of the approach. Just like four kinds of people, Artha, Artati, Jigyashu, and Gyanicha, they approach Krishna to perform bhakti. But in mature bhakti, one performs bhakti for anya abhilasita sunya, with no other desire except Krishna's anukul seva. So we have to mature to that level and give up the idea, I'm performing bhakti only to get free from my suffering. And believe it or not, that becomes a very challenging thing. Because people, even when they take to bhakti, they maintain self-interest. But the whole idea of bhakti is not self-interest. It is, I am the das of Krishna, and everything is about the interest of Shri Radha Krishna Yugal, Sriman Mahaprabhu. All right, so hopefully this was a little helpful to give some insight into the concept of the jiva and suffering, and how to understand hints that the questions that arise in the jiva about original causality, etc., because that's why those questions arise. Because I'm identifying with my own self-interest. I want to know why I was placed here, why I didn't go there, and even if I'm accepted and say, okay, it was my fault, then I try to create a narrative, and our acharyas have done that purposely to help us, but then we lock into that narrative as, well, this is what happened. I was there in the spiritual world, I was with Krishna, and somehow I made a mistake and fell here. So we obviously know that narrative, right, was to help us, but it's not an actual siddhant. Secondly, well, we were in a place like a middle ground, and we made a bad choice. But then many theological complications come up. Well, what was the basis of the choice? What was the information content which led to making that choice? You understand? So many things. So we have to, one, study and read carefully, and we also have to be able to differentiate what is ontology and what is history. So I'll conclude with this. Ontology means when our acharyas explain something to help us understand the concept itself. What is the Atma? What is material energy? What is our relationship with God. Just like our Srila Prabhupada and many of our acharyas, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as well, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, would often use words like, everyone is originally Krishna conscious. In common parlance, if I said that, we would have an indication we were historically, originally in a position of Krishna consciousness. But we know from all Siddhantic studies of our theology that we were not originally Krishna conscious and then fell away, because the nature of Krishna consciousness is something that you don't fall from. Right? Sri Rupa Goswami Pad has mentioned it. What is this? Sarvata Rahitam, Sarvata Dongsa Rahitam, Yarapi Dongsa Karane. That when one has love of God or is situated in actual Krishna consciousness, then you do not fall from that position. Srila Prabhupada, 7th Canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. No one falls from Vaikuntha. Many explanations of Jiva Goswami Pad and others, that the jivas in the spiritual world don't even know there's a material world. They are fully absorbed in loving God. They don't have a concept of a material world or something other than loving God. They are truly anya abhilas, sunya, void of any other conception or desire. So, the idea of the question arising to create a narrative or some rationale for our position is part of the false ego. The need to satisfy the false ego with an explanation, because it's hard to digest that this is also one of Krishna's leelas, and I'm situated in that Shristi Leela and have been from Anadikal. Part of what happens during Krishna's Shristi Leela is also explained in the 10th Canto Srimad Bhagavatam. Anugrahaya bhaktanam manushinam dehinam astita. Bhajate tadrasi kritva yachutva tat paro bhavet. In Sanskrit language, the word bhavet is an imperative. And it means when Krishna makes unlimited descents into the material world and performs Leela, those Leelas primarily are to give happiness and satisfaction to his devotees. Paritranaya sadunam, anugrahaya bhaktanam, prema rasniyas karite ashwadan, rag marg bhakti lok karite pracharan. So always the emphasis is between Krishna and his devotee. But the nature of the devotees is that they are so merciful, they are so kind, that they then reveal the nature of Krishna's Leela to the jivas. Yat vrichaya mat kattado, jatasharasya pumam. In Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto, this is mentioned. I think it's 11:8 or maybe 11:20. 11th chapter, 11th Canto, 20th chapter, verse 8 or 11. So, here, this word Yadricha has been analyzed by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakurpad in his Madhurya Kandambini Grantha. And he's given understanding that this word Yadricha means of its own accord. The extreme extent of Karunika means mercy. And it has three elements. It is Swatantra, it is Sama-artha, and it is Ahoitaki. I heard one very nice explanation from Sri Achutalal Bhattji, very high class of Vaishnava. And he gave these three elements of the word Yadricha. Swatantrata means it's independent. So the presence of bhakti in the heart of a devotee, that devotee is granted independence by Bhagavan to distribute that bhakti. So Parama Swatantra Bhagavad Bhakta Jata Kripa Mangalodaya. The bhakta, the devotee, is empowered to distribute Bhagavad Bhakti to all conditioned jivas. So Bhagavan performs pastime for their happiness. Those devotees in their mood of loving service to Bhagavan and coming to the platform of recognizing the differentiation between Bada jivas, like some Bada jivas are innocent, some Bada jivas are envious, etc. So the Uttam Bhagavat devotees, whether they're Nitya Parikar, whether they become Sadhan Siddha, whatever, they come to the platform of Madhyam, which means Ishware Tari Dineshu, Baliseshu Disatchacha, Prema Maitri Kripa Upeksha. And they see these four categories. They have love for Bhagavan, praying. They have Maitri, or relationship with Vaishnavas. And Kripa, they show mercy, Baleshu, to those who are innocent, the Balajivas who are in ignorance. And they may show Upeksha to those who are blasphemous, envious, completely opposed to Bhagavan because in this life, due to whatever karmic situation, they're unable to accept or hear from the sadhu. Understand? Sometimes we see in the highest class of pure Vaishnavas, they may even bypass apeksha. This is demonstrated by Akhanda Guru Tattva Sri Nityananda Prabhu himself in relation to Jagai and Madai. Though they should have been neglected because of their ignorance. Jagai and Madai not aparadis. They were in ignorance. But Nityananda Prabhu sought to deal with that ignorance and even shed blood to deliver them. This is the extreme karunika, means mercy and compassion in the heart of those who are the prakash or manifestations of the potency of Nityananda, Sadhu Guru. So they then deliver all the jivas in the material jagats. You understand? So, hopefully this gave some explanation and it will help with our sudden bhajan. Also, this is not a siddhant that is easily digested by every single person. So I would not recommend that if you've heard this and you can digest, you can think about, you can always inquire, study, read, you can ask for references, etc. But just simply explaining to many devotees who are still in the stage of the idea that I've simply come to bhakti to get free from birth and death and old age and suffering, etc. And now all of the narratives that were explained, okay, since a fox is trotting right across my road, that's okay. All right, so though this presentation is there to help us understand the urgency to take to the process of bhakti. So we should not think the narratives are wrong, because certainly kleshagni subhada. Bhakti does remove suffering. But that cannot be our impetus or our motivation to practice bhakti. Okay? Alright, my Dandavat Pranam, Panchakalpatrubhyascha, Kripsindvayevacha, Patitanam Pavaneva Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.